everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. I am Jeff, and Amanda is here as well. Thank you so much for being here, Amanda.
Hi, Jeff. How you doing today?
I am good. I know you're based in Pittsburgh. I'm in Ohio, not Pittsburgh. Sorry,
Philadelphia.
I'm in Pennsylvania. And between the two of us, it's like freezing cold again all of a sudden.
It was super hot, and now I'm like bundled up again. I don't know why it's raining today.
It's weird. I have made rules for myself the last couple of years. I'm a middle-aged dad, so that's kind of how it goes. But once the weather is nice enough for shorts, it is forever nice enough for shorts. And so yesterday I just froze it off because that's just how it goes. But it's supposed to get about 10 degrees warmer every day this week, so I'm looking forward to
fingers crossed. Maybe we'll have
cruising into the weekend. Yeah,
for
sure. Well, for all of you that are here, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about HTML games on Alexa today. But before that, I want to make sure we get into a few of the announcements that we have, like we do every week. And so the first one I wanted to talk about is actually something Amanda mentioned last week. And it's for people that work or are involved with radio stations. If you want to get your radio station on Alexa, the Radio Skills Kit is now available. And we have a tech talk and a landing page all about this new release. And you can check it out at alexa.design/RSK. And I think we'll probably drop that link in the chat as well. But again, it's a really great way to just take the live stream of your radio station and get that right onto Alexa for your customers.
So speaking of tech talks, I'm going to give one more plug for our Developer Tools 101 Tech Talk, because that's taking place next week. And this Tech Talk is featuring you, Jeff. Going to give us a sneak peek about what you'll be sharing with us at this Tech Talk?
Can I give you a sneak peek? I guess so. We're going to talk about the options you have for developer tools. And so for those of you that are really advanced developers, I think you'll probably pick up a thing here or there. But this is meant to really demonstrate, how does the dev console work? How does the CLI work? How can I use them together? How can I do local debugging? How do I use some of the tools that are in the dev console? So it should be a good coverage of all of that.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I also want to remind you guys, we have this thing called Alexa Learning Lab. If you guys haven't seen it, there's a number of courses in there that teach you some of the basics and some of the more advanced skills that you'll find inside Alexa development. And we just released a new one yesterday called Skill Building Basics. This was something that Amanda's been working on for a while. And in the course, you're going to use the Alexa Skills Kit to develop a simple custom skill. Again, for those of you that are super advanced or do this all the time, you'll find going through some of these basics classes still will teach you a few things that you may not have seen along the way. But there's step-by-step instructions, and then you get to use the hands-on experience you have to build your own skill. So I think it's a really great training course. And you can access that course and any of our other training courses on our trainings and workshop page. And you can find that. I think there's another link popping up in the
we're
chat.
Putting all these links in the chat. It's terrific.
I know.
Thank you. Thanks behind the scenes team for keeping up with all those chat links. We got a lot of links to share today. And also, if there's anything that you think would be like great next steps for a learning lab lesson, give us the feedback and let us know, because we are working on expanding that learning lab, and we want to make sure that it's the right stuff for people that have questions about how to do Alexa development. I'm really serious about trying to make sure the content is good and up to date and right. So please leave your feedback if you have it. Give it a try. Give the new lesson a try. Let us know what you think. Really
I think one of the other things that we're looking for is, if there's topics that are hard to understand or really a lot to unpack, like in-skill purchasing is a good example. If there's things like that you just want someone to kind of really hold your hand and take you through the whole journey, those are the kind of things we'd love to hear from you about.
Yeah, and we're definitely talking about doing more with in-skill purchasing. I don't know when it'll be done, but that's on our list of things to be sure that there's a lesson about, because I know that there's lots of questions out there about how to do it and when to do it and all that good stuff. So yeah. One last mention for today. Next week, we're going to have members from our developer advocacy group. That's DAG for short. They hang out behind the scenes on the show, but next week they're actually going to be on the show. It's going to be Johannes Hein and Andrew Cargo, and they're going to be talking about what their team does and give us some anecdotes from their developer interactions and some insider knowledge on how they're advocating for the community in their behind the scenes and often upfront way.
Awesome. And it should be noted, Amanda and I have not figured out how we're going to do this yet, but we're actually going to do that broadcast from the Project Voice Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Right. We're going to be at Chattanooga next week.
We will be in Chattanooga next week, so you will not see these crazy backdrops that you're seeing behind us here today.
No toys.
We will be somewhere else. We might be huddled up in some random hotel room or in a conference room, or who knows where we're going to land, but we will figure that stuff out, and we will be here next Tuesday.
So exciting. I've never been to Chattanooga, so I'm looking forward to it.
Chattanooga is a fun town, and they have maybe the best bandwidth in the country. So that's good to know as well. All right, let's get Chris on here. Chris Subagio comes to us from the games team. So, Chris, I'd like for you to introduce yourself. I know you've been a guest of ours here before, but it's always good to remind people who you are and what you do.
Hi, yeah, I'm Chris Subagio. I'm a software engineer and designer for Alexa Games. My past includes game development, I think almost 25 years of it now, of which 10 of it was here at Amazon. Part of it was with the Amazon Game Studios before I moved over to Alexa. And now at Alexa, I'm developing features for our beloved developers to create better games. And I am also developing games myself. As a dog fooding exercise to make sure that I know exactly what the experience for all of our developers is.
Always a good idea. And I know we have a little video of a game you've been working on, so we'll get to that when the time is right. But it's 25 years. That's a lot of experience. And I think about the fact that I have also been working in this industry for 25 years, not in games specifically, but in software development. And that used to be a really long, like, who has 25 years?
It used to be a really long time.
And now I look around and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm that old guy.
I know, yeah. When I think back to the fact that the first games I worked on were the Game Boy Advance, I feel like I feel pretty old. I feel like there's been a lot of things.
No kidding. I have a thing that I just got that is a Game Boy Advance, so I can stream from my Game Boy Advance carts.
Oh, so cool.
I haven't plugged it in yet, but it's on my
That is awesome.
I have so many old carts. I have so many old game things just kind of sitting in my office that within easy arm's reach.
That's just tech, right? Like, it changes so much over the years. I remember when we first started developing on the Game Boy Advance, it took us time to burn the EEPROMs to test on. like once you finish making your revisions, you're iterating, you're like burning to the thing. And now when I'm working in Alexa games, I can iterate by deploying to the cloud. Right. And then running on my Alexa device faster than it used to take to burn a tiny little 32K EEPROM.
Wow, amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's astonishing.
I'm seeing W. Giorgio in the chat saying, when's a web API for games learning lab? It's not a bad suggestion, but we'd have to lean on you for that one, I think.
I would love to do that.
we should consider that. Thank you.
We won't call that a commitment, W. Giorgio, but that would be pretty cool. I agree.
But it's a good idea.
Yes, very much. All right, so we've had you on here before to talk about HTML games and some of the web API stuff that you've been working on. So I want to get a little deeper today. So when we think about, just to kick off the conversation, what are the kinds of graphics features that I can use in Alexa games on devices with screens, like the one behind me here?
Right. So you have roughly two options. It gets a little more complicated once you dive deeper, but you've got either the option to go straight HTML, which a few games have done to great effect. Usually if they need a lot of text, it's just easier to use your normal HTML features. Sometimes it's because they already have things going on the web anyway, and they just port it directly over. In that case, you can still also use Canvas. You can just use pings, videos, audio, all the things you can use with HTML normally, or you switch over to WebGL, in which case you get basically a modern 3D rendering pipeline, which you can still use for 2D or 3D, significantly faster because you're doing all the work up front to convert things into textures and meshes and so on, and the GPU is happier. And that's much better if you're going to do really interesting animations, particle systems, compositing effects, things like that. For the second choice, you'd also end up with like a whole bunch of frameworks and engines that you can use, from just rendering code like 3JS all the way up to like game engines like Babylon.js and PlayCanvas.
Nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask about those game engines because those are HTML5 compatible game engines, right? Like Babylon.
Yeah, my experience so far is that there are high-end engines like Unity, Unreal that can export to HTML, but they're not native, and they end up having this translation layer that reduces performance on our devices. But the native ones like Babylon, Phaser, PlayCanvas, these are all like all-in-one engines with rendering and audio and physics and all that kind of stuff and game objects. They work great on our devices.
Oh, that's really cool. That seems like it'd be a really easy pipeline because people are already used to using those sort of engines, and they want to be able to just use those for their games.
Yeah, there are actually a few that are advanced enough to where they do the serving of the actual game. So I have a template available on GitHub if you would like to try using PlayCanvas with Alexa hosted skills. So you don't even have to have any AWS infrastructure of your own.
Cool.
you can deploy like a small wrapper into an Alexa hosted skill, and then change the URL to point to your Play Canvas game, which is hosted by Play Canvas, and everything's up and running in minutes.
Oh, really cool.
Do you want me to share that GitHub repo with the audience?
Yeah,
Yes.
do that.
Let me look it up.
Definitely.
I've got the link here. You shared it with me, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah,
The
sure.
Alexa-Play Canvas one?
That's the one.
Okay. It is sent. You guys are all seeing that coming through. This is actually on Chris's personal GitHub, it looks like. So be nice. Be gentle, everybody.
Well, I'll actually be doing a series of these as part of an exploration of compatibility and sort of tweaking with the development community how we use these tools. I started with Play Canvas. There'll be another one coming out soon for integrating with Inkle Studio's Ink language, which is actually a really interesting way to build skills that are that are
that's the one
conversational.
I'm really excited about. I know you reached out to me about that a while ago, and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta do that.
Yeah.
We'll post. Oh, we want to add that we'll post the links in the YouTube video description too. So if anybody loses the chat, we'll still have those links posted.
Yes. Yeah,
Yep,
that is.
the Ink one is in progress. We're super happy to hear from anybody who would like to get investigations into other engines as well.
Cool. Yeah,
Wow.
I love that. I love that kind of game, that interactive fiction style game. I've talked about that so many times before.
I'm gonna flash the
But
GitHub
actually,
link on the screen
though-
just for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Amanda. I just want to let you guys know I'm going to put that on the screen.
Oh, great. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that'll be great. So that's where you click to get the Play Canvas info. I mean, I'd love to pick your brain about what are styles of games that you think work really well for Alexa, because I mean, I was thinking a lot about like 4X strategy, because I know you had a demo at one
man.
point where you were looking at that, and I think it just has a really good marriage with the idea of voice control.
Yeah, I've done a couple of different 4X prototypes over the years that I haven't had the time to turn into a full game. If I could just get a couple of months to myself, I would so love to do that. It is just so cool to say stuff, like give complex commands with your voice. It's just, there's like a Star Trek bridge feeling to it, right? I didn't bring videos with me today, unfortunately, but next time I think I should probably do a little demo walk of prototypes I've built over the years that I haven't been able to productize yet, but are really fun ways to talk about the kind of language models you can have. In one, I actually have a space exploration 4X, and it's really neat to be able to give commands that have somewhat ambiguous inputs. So you can say something like send 50% of the ships over there, or send, take 20% of the ships and send them to Mars. And it's fun to try and work out the logic for what happens if you say send 20% 5 times in a row. Like which 20% are picked and how do they go where they go.
Oh, interesting.
It's a really interesting natural language problem. And once you get close to a solution, it feels magic. Like when the player says it and it just happens, they're like, this is cool.
That's really cool. Do we want to go into some of the technical details? Actually, I have like 4 different questions just based on this conversation alone. But like, first of all, say I made a game in Play Canvas, and I already have it. What do I want to port that directly to Alexa? I could just use your link there and just port it directly over.
Yeah, good question. So there are at least 2 different ways to look at running an Alexa game. Either the logic is in the skill and you're just sending sort of control commands to the website, show this now, play this audio now, play this so on. Or the game is just running in the web app and you're treating Alexa like a controller. It's just intent coming in, intent coming in, intent coming in. The skill doesn't really know what's going on. It's just passing things over. If that second model is compatible with the way your game works, then yeah, you could actually just drop in the template code, change the link to point to your Play Canvas game, and you're getting intents piped into your Play Canvas game.
Oh, okay, cool.
So yeah, in that case, it's not even a port. It's more like you just have to write the new controller code for what to do when an intent shows up.
Right. So like normally if I was coding in say Unity, I would like write the code for what happens when I hit the A key versus what happens when I hit the W key. And in this case, I'm just writing the code for what happens when I hit a particular Alexa intent.
Exactly that. Yeah, I've got a bit of drop-in JavaScript code that goes into the Play Canvas game, and from that point onwards, when intents come in and you're running on an Alexa device, it just uses the Play Canvas eventing mechanism to fire intent received, intent received, intent received, and you can do whatever you like with that anywhere in your game.
Oh, that's so cool. It really seems like it would take a little bit of design thought to figure out the best way to integrate voice controls with particular games. Do you have any tips?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, if you design for voice to start with, it's significantly easier, and there isn't a one-to-one mapping between button presses and voice. In general, if you could press a button to do it, you probably don't want to say it because it's faster to press the button. So yeah, this is the point at which we start talking design stuff instead of tech stuff, and there's a whole tree of conversation there. But I think the important part is that stuff is still deeply in evolution. Like the reason why I want to make it much easier for people to come and experiment with us is because there's so much growth to be had in the NLU gaming space that simplifying the tech, making sure as many people can come in as possible, and then like ignore the tech and start working on the design stuff is my goal. I want to see more people do that, and I'd love to have more conversations with everybody about that.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a very important voice design. What is the word?
Tenet.
Thank you. Which is that if something is easy for a user to do on your website or your mobile app or your game in this case, one of the examples I always use is people are like, oh, if I'm building like a banking skill, well, one of the things I would want to do first is tell the user their balance. Okay, that's fine. I agree. That's probably a very useful thing to have. But is it your first thing? Because they like on my phone, I can tap the mobile app icon, and that's the first thing I'm going to see is my balance. So is it worth it for me to invest a ton of time and energy in that, or should I focus on the thing that is 3 or 4 clicks deep? And when you talk about gaming, I know Amanda and I have talked about this. You're playing a game, you've got 4 different loadouts of armor and weaponry, and I just want to switch from one to the other. Well, that generally requires opening a menu, navigating, doing a few things, clicking on, And so, I mean, if you're on a PC, maybe you've mapped some keystrokes or something, but especially on a console, that can get pretty tricky. And so that seems to me kind of what you're describing, right? The idea that I have to think about voice design and where does the design really make sense to apply this kind of voice canvas?
Yeah, I mean, those are great analogies. Those are super awesome questions. I think the banking analogy one is actually surprisingly easy to follow for folks. I think in that case, yeah, showing the balance is important. But if you were going to ask for something, you probably care more about like, hey, did that check clear yet? Right. Or hey, did this payment come in? Or did I how much did I spend at shop X last week? Right? Like those are queries that have variables. And generally, those variables are either you searching through a list or you typing something out. And that's where I think voice is generally like more powerful mechanically. And it's the same in games. Like if when we look at, say, like an RPG, and you've got a party and you want to and you need to transfer items between them, and there's like some item management as part of the gameplay, it is significantly easier to say, hey, transfer 6 potions from Bob to Alice, than it is to open the menu for Bob, look into his inventory, find his potions, click on the number of times you want the potions to have, and like move it, and then find Alice in the transfer menu. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of construct I think that's mechanically powerful. In games, we also have a second mode, which is just voices feels good. So even if you're just selecting a character reply option in the middle of NPC dialogue, surprisingly, that's actually really immersive. Like even if you're just saying like option A, option B, option C, preferably you're saying the actual, a fragment of the dialogue instead, it just feels more like you're saying it. And that actually is different from utility skills and apps in NLU, I think. Right. So those two.
Into feeling like you're in it, right?
Yeah. It like there's something about the human, like the actual act of vocalization that makes you immersed in something.
I want to play games where I yell at the NPCs and they can hear me.
Well, you mentioned that. That's a pretty cool lead into at least one mention that I want to get into this week, which is Dead Island 2 is shipping on PC and Xbox this week. And it's going to be the first game that actually has Alexa embedded in the game. So instead of having an Alexa device nearby and starting a skill, inside the game you can turn on Alexa Game Control, we call it. The game will capture audio from the game mic, send it up, and if you say something that is recognized by the game, it'll just react. The way that works behind the scenes is that intents are actually delivered back to the game instead of to a skill. And we do some automatic voice detection to determine whether or not you're speaking to the game. At the same time, you can actually say the wake word, say Alexa, and you can get Alexa functionality inside the game as well. So headset on, microphone, you can set a timer, you can announce stuff to the rest of the house, you can hear announcements from the rest of the house.
I didn't realize that was built into. That's really neat.
Yeah. But then you can also yell at zombies to attract them. And you can attract them by type as well, which is an exclusive feature for the Alexa game control. So if you see a group of zombies together, you can actually attract individual zombies out, kiting them away to make them easier to kill, which is kind of fun.
Love that. Hey, I have a question about that, and answer as much or as little as you can. Is that something that other developers can do? Is that capability available to anyone?
It is still a managed partner capability, so it is by invitation only. But we're always happy to hear from anybody who's interested in participating in our technologies.
Cool.
I can think of some games that I'd love to play where I'd love to mod in that functionality to be able to talk to the game in various ways or use voice as a controller. So I think I could go off on a long tangent, but there's so much possibilities, and I'm really excited about the future of the voice control and seeing where it goes. I think games have sort of dabbled with this before, but never I think at this level with Alexa. So it's going to be really cool.
Yep, yeah, and I think there's big things coming in that space as well. It'll be very interesting to see where we go with it.
Exciting.
So I have one more technical question, which is if I'm an HTML5 developer and I'm developing a strategy game or an RPG or something, I know that there's a certain amount of time like the microphone can be left open. Mm-hmm. So do I have to continue to reprompt my user for input when I'm working with a game like this?
So if we're talking about games on devices without screens, yes.
Yeah.
You do have to continue to you have to prompt. Once you start teaching your players about barging in, though, about saying the wake word, you can use APLA to play hold music effectively. Okay. So you can design your game around the idea that you're going to say something, you're going to ask a question, then you're not going to open the microphone, and you're just going to play hold music for a while, and you're going to let the player choose when to barge in. This works really well for like puzzle games and stuff where there's an indeterminate amount of thinking time that they might need, but the speaking time works within the window, right? So if you were doing some kind of trivia game, you might want to go like, well, say the wake word when you want to answer, and then play elevator music basically until until they're ready to answer. In fact, that question and a couple of questions I'm seeing in the chat, Jeff, can we roll the video? I just for context as I start try answer some of these questions.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna play this, and it's only about a minute long. But let me know, Chris, if we need to interrupt it earlier.
Yeah, we can run the minute, I think.
Okay.
Computer, open anagram machine.
One moment.
Why, hello there, new player. Welcome to the Anagram Machine, a game about jumbled words. Let's get right to it. When each round starts, I'll give you a category and then begin disclosing letters in random order. As soon as you've guessed the word, say a wake word to barge in and tell me what it is. For each letter I haven't revealed yet, I'll give you extra points. Got it?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Your category is weather. Your first letter is T as in terrific.
All right.
Yeah. So in that case, we've got the play elevator music, almost literally in this case, and wait for the player to barge in and give an answer. But we also see that in Web API, if you open the microphone and the player doesn't answer, it's fine. The app continues to run, the microphone closes, and the player can still barge in afterwards. So that's kind of the interaction mode that we have available today. On another game of mine, Chill Out Checkers, I do open the microphone at every turn. It's a checkers game, and you specify a number to indicate which piece you'd like to move. And after you move, I do open the microphone, and I let it time out. So if you rapidly want to continue with the next move, you can. But if you need some time to think, it's fine too. And both of those modes work together, overlapping in Web API.
Awesome.
Cool.
We have a bunch of questions in the chat. I feel like I want to start diving into
we
that.
should go to the chat.
The first one was around voice cloning. So Andy Muncie is a big thinker. She's asked me a bunch of questions over the years, and this one is not specific to HTML games, but Alexa as a whole. Considering changing my skill from the poly voice that I use today to a voice clone of my own voice for my skill, can you suggest a solution for this and some overall advice? I think that there was some really. I think this question also got asked in our Slack, and there was some good advice there. But I think the number one thing to keep in mind is that it's not an easy process to use your own voice or even to use any voice actor's voice, because there isn't a way to synthesize that in a timely manner. I guess that's the best way to think about it. You can synthesize your voice. You can generate all the audio files and then use those in APLA or as as sound effects inside your skill, and that will work fine. But you're basically replacing the speech that you would have provided to the user with an audio file instead, and so it's not dynamically generating it on the fly. There are services out there that do provide those capabilities where you can generate audio for your voice or someone else's voice. But my experience, at least so far, has been that they're not responsive enough to generate that speech for you in time to respond in the way that Alexa wants to. And you end up with a lot of time, energy, and potentially cost to do something like this. So the question always stems from, is it worth it? What is your ROI on doing something like that? And so I don't want to talk anyone out of it, especially if it's for your own hobby or enjoyment or whatever. Go for it. Just keep in mind that like you're going to be generating tons and tons of audio files. I think about skills that I've built. I generally build a database of things that I want to say, and then my skill goes in and grabs one of those things randomly. Well, if I wanted to take that same approach with pre-recorded audio of my voice or someone else's, we're talking thousands of audio files that I would have to generate and replace those strings instead with all of those audio files. It's doable, but you also run into some platform constraints and limitations that might get in your way. So I don't want to dissuade you from doing it, but it is a pretty big undertaking for sure. Chris, I don't know if you've experienced any of that, but I'd love your thoughts.
Well, I will say that in the clip we just watched, that was obviously not TTS. That was all audio, and it's relatively natural for game developers to use a narrator. So the extra cost of recording and editing and uploading and all that stuff makes sense from a game development point of view. It is definitely more expensive, obviously, than just doing TTS. But I will say for this particular skill, I ended up just recording myself. And I've got a little podcasting setup where I'm recording directly into the computer. I happen to be using Adobe Audition for that, which does a lot of the noise cleanup and normalization and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like one-click-ish. And then I've ended up writing a little library, which I probably should share somewhere, that lets you export markers from Adobe Audition. That exports XMP files, right? Markers. I've got a library that imports it into Play Canvas and basically sets up a sound sprite for you automatically. So you can say, like, from this file, I want this clip. And so for Anagram Machine, I do have the kind of compositional stuff you expect to have in a game. It's like, this is round 4. You have 138 points. Your third letter is F, as in fancy. I did those mostly. I thought about doing generative stuff. I tried a couple of generative algorithms that are available for free, the open source code for them. And as you say, it's really expensive to run them on a server. So I kind of understand why these services that provide that as a service take time and or money, one or the other, right? Like exchange the two. And when I tried setting up my own server in AWS to do this work, it just wasn't worth it. You're exactly right. Like, it was just too expensive. So I fell back on traditional gaming game technologies. I built these sound sprites and I just play them back in sequence. So you in the game you'll hear me say, it's like, you scored 132 points, and it works out great. It feels good. It feels like it's almost nostalgically funny to hear that kind of compositional audio.
Right.
So in this context for entertainment, I think it works great.
I was actually curious how you went about that. If you were doing the number parts, like 30 and 2 and 100, or if you were recording, like, I know I have a max score of 200, so I'll just record all 200 values.
No, it actually worked out great to do the piecewise. So I record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 20, and then 30, 40, 50, 60, and then 100, 1,000. And now I can sort of type in anything and it breaks down the words into into the individual pieces, and off you go. It's only like 30 samples, I think, to get to a million.
That's amazing. I actually just I posted this on Twitter yesterday, but there's a mathematician that I follow on TikTok, of all places, and he did an interesting analysis of numbers yesterday. I'm getting way off topic, but if you look at the number line, he said the number of numbers between 0 and 10 that have a 7 in them is 10%, right? There's one number in 0 to 9 that have the number 7. And then if you take that to 100, well, now it becomes like 20%, because you have all the 70s plus all the numbers that have a 7 in them. And he kept extrapolating that out to like octillions, and it's like 99.8% of numbers have a 7 in them. It blew my mind to think about how we twist all that stuff apart. So it's interesting for you to say that I can get to a million with just 30 audio files. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like it's this stuff is super fun, the sequences. And then I did a little thing to make my life easier as the game developer. When I record my sentences, like, hey, it's the end of the game, you have scored X points. I write the script as if it's a fixed number. So I say, you've scored 10 points. And then in the markup in addition, I'll write the title of that clip, and I'll put the 10 in brackets. And then I'll also create a second marker in the file that cuts out the 10, basically, and call it the same thing that I put in the brackets. And so in the game, I can automatically say, play this thing, but replace the 10 with a number, and it does it automatically.
Very clever, rather than having points be its own file. So the sequencing in a game is actually really easy. Play this file, but replace the variables with these other files. And that it took a little setup, like a day or two to put that together. But then after that, everything became like super, super quick. Love it. Actually, we have a few more good questions here as well.
Yep.
W. Giorgio wanted to know if Play Canvas is okay for 2D games.
Oh yeah, absolutely. 2D and 3D in modern devices is not really there's no hardware difference, right? You're still effectively drawing quads with textures on them and moving them around. So from the performance point of view, everything's fine. The tools for working with 2D in Play Canvas are probably not as fleshed out as you might expect from a dedicated 2D gaming engine, but it entirely depends on what you're doing. Like if you're just moving some sprites around, totally fine. If you need more like tile map support and stuff like that, that's kind of missing. There is support from the community that I've seen. I haven't had a chance to try them out for those kinds of things. It's pretty extensible as an engine, and writing your own stuff in it is really easy. Awesome. So I would say that if you're shopping around and you feel like doing a couple of intro tutorials to explore engines, there's nothing to say that you shouldn't try 2D in Play Canvas.
Got it. And then his follow-up question was, he's been playing with Phaser a lot. Is there any reason to switch, like go to Play Canvas or jump to Phaser? Or do you have a preference? It sounds like you're more a Play Canvas person, but
they're both great. I'm actually going to do a Phaser one as well, integration. I think Phaser feels a little lower level to me in some ways. There's some really nice packaging and serving stuff that Play Canvas does. Versioning stuff is really cool online, but it's kind of like a half a dozen of one, six of the other kind of deal. Phaser also does some things great. Babylon does some things great. They're all viable in my mind. Right. It entirely boils down to what you find comfortable and what you enjoy using.
Got it. Amanda, there's a good question from Milton. You want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Question is, what would you say are pros and cons of logic in skill versus in web app? And I'm wondering if you mean HTML versus skill.
Yeah. So I tend to think of those as web app authoritative or skill authoritative, like who owns the state of the game. Super great question. I could go on for ages about that, but let me try and bring a couple of things to surface. First of all, we all know that jumping in and out of skills is important on Alexa, and people just walk away. They're just used to walking away or ignoring the prompt and letting the skill die. And when they come back and relaunch the skill, they expect to be where they were before. So if your game is skill authoritative, it is generally easier to just serialize that, save it in a Dynamo somewhere or an Elasticache or whatever it is that fits your usage pattern. And then when the skill comes back again, all that state is there. If your game is web app authoritative, then you have to copy that stuff up in order to save it for the next launch. So that's one thing that becomes easier if you're skill authoritative. On the other hand, obviously everything is significantly easier to iterate on and work sort of in isolation when you're web app authoritative, right? You're basically just going to develop on your desktop the game, and you're going to spoof your NLU inputs, and everything should work exactly the same when you run it on device, except that you'd be able to talk to it. So for development-wise, it is significantly simpler to make something web app authoritative. The thing we just saw now, Anagram Machine, that one is entirely skill authoritative. And it actually ends up sending these lists of sort of like a presentation timeline down to the device, like move the camera here, turn on this light, play these particle effects, play this audio file, change the prompt on this portion of the screen to this string, and yada 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 yada, played out in a timeline, and it transmits that every time it wants something to happen. So even if I just cache that timeline and replay it when you reopen the skill, I can basically get the game to exactly the same state it was before without thinking about it too hard. And that actually was really, really useful for resume, for help, for a couple of different intents that need to go somewhere and come back again. I can just, instead of like rethinking out the logic, I can just cache it and play it back again. That was neat. It took a little bit of fiddling, but my test framework for this is like a little script of, then the user does this, and the user does this, and the user does this, user this. And as a consequence of running that logic in the test framework, it actually spits out all of those blocks of presentation commands, which then in my game on the desktop, I can just play back. So there's, for instance, there's an infinite mode in the game, and I say something encouraging to you when you've reached your 30th round, and then like something ridiculous when you reach your 50th round, and like testing that on device would take forever, right?
Right.
So instead, the test framework just spits out someone playing 100 rounds, and I can pick each of those turns and just play it back in the game, and then test weird things that are only supposed to happen rarely. So that was really fun to build, and once it was running, it was awesome to be able to like just jump anywhere in your game and play a bit. And that partially comes from that separation of skill authoritativeness.
I want to dig into something because I really hit on something interesting. Again, this is more of a design question, but it's also kind of technical too. Like a lot of games that we're used to as like hardcore gamers, you cannot walk away from, like you can't even pause Elden Ring, right? Like you have to be like focused on it. But it seems like with Alexa games, you want to add the functionality to immediately drop it if you need to. Do you think that's just like really important for the style of game?
I think it is. I mean, it's not always important to drop exactly where you were, like the very prompt that you dropped off of. But people do expect to be able to walk away, because you don't want people to actively save, right? You don't have to. People have to say, "Save my game now, please." Right. So it is important for you to think about like what game states you should preserve, because the player will just expect them to be there when they next start the game.
Right. Cool. Looking at the next question in line, I have a new idea of game design. I feel the future of games, I should be able to do all the things no matter where I am. So if I didn't have a device with a screen, I should still be able to use it. And then games like that work that way.
So I'm gonna end up doing a non-screen version of this game too, which will have slightly different flow because state awareness is harder. But state awareness is really important. We talked earlier about a 4X game. It would be basically impossible to play without being able to see the map.
Right.
So it's nice if your game design happens to support the idea of having maybe like either a full audio mode or just a partial audio mode. Like if you were doing a 4X, you could check in if there's a time-based component and say like, hey, is that finished building yet? Or, if you remember things enough about the state, you can issue commands as well. But if you can't, that's okay too. Like it's fine to have a game where you need the screen context to talk to it, because frankly, you're going to get richer interactions because you've got all that context coming at you.
Have you ever looked at providing alternative views to things? So this is something that I think a lot about in traditional Alexa skills, where the user doesn't have a screen, but I need them to see something. Mm-hmm. And we have the ability, with permissions and things, we can get access to their mobile phone number. We can get email addresses. Like we could send them a screenshot of what the checkerboard currently looks like or something like that, right? Have you evaluated any kind of options like that?
Yeah, we think about that a lot, actually, about second screen experiences, and the trick is usually UX. Like, what's this the lowest friction way of getting that done, and it's actually surprisingly hard. I prototyped a few things over the years, and it's tricky. I will say that one thing you can do with the web API that's interesting that hasn't been explored fully yet, but is available for people to mess with if they want feel like trying, is you get sockets in the web app, and you can actually use you can connect a mobile device to the web app via a socket, which effectively gives you like 3 members in the connection. You've got the mobile app, the web app running on an Echo device, and Alexa skill running, so you can get audio inputs. And I've done things like tap to talk from the mobile device, which is actually surprisingly nice. So you're playing an Alexa game on an Echo device or a Fire TV, right? You can see the game running. I've been using a QR code to like connect the two. So you point the camera at the game loads on or like a game controller loads on the mobile device, and then you can like tap inputs. You can type in words. You can tap to talk, even though you're talking to the Echo device. It works out pretty well. I've done sort of experiments with multiple people connecting over sockets. So you can have like 4 players locally playing like a quiz game, and everybody can buzz in to determine who's going to answer the question and then speak to the Echo device. So there's a lot of topologies like that are super interesting, but the friction of doing the QR code stuff, that's still not quite there yet. It still feels like a novelty that only some people will engage with, and it's harder to get a larger market to engage with that. But yeah, lots and lots of thoughts around that stuff. Super, as usual, eager to hear whether or not the developer community is interested in pursuing those things.
Right. Yeah, I still remember the day when we pushed these out, and it was so exciting.
Oh yeah.
Oh, the buttons! Oh my gosh, I remember this.
Play on your devices.
That was pretty fun. Yeah, I made all the games for those buttons.
You did?
Yep.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that actually leads us to our next question. W. Giorgio asked us if you made the checkers game. I think you said earlier that you were one of the developers on that?
Yep, that's my game.
And so he wanted to know how you made the character's mouth move.
So that's an interesting one. When you do TTS for Web API, if you'd like the TTS to play in the Web API instead of just playing on top of it, you use something called a transformer, the same as with APL. With your response, you send a transformer, you give it the text, you get an audio file on the web app. It's part of the JavaScript callback. That audio file actually contains speech marks in it, which is a JSON list of events that happen during the audio. And it'll tell you when a sentence begins, when a word begins, and all the way down to when a phoneme begins. So you get like the A, E, I, O, U, K, T, F, S, events. And I just plugged that directly into my rig for the face in that game. So it plays Alexa TTS, and it uses the speech marks to drive the animation.
Awesome. So Amanda, that sounds similar to the avatar-driven stuff you've done on Twitch. That reminds me of a similar idea.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, I know how I would do it, but because I have an animation background. But I used to do all kinds of different lip sync solutions depending on. But basically, how that works is there's 2 different ways that picks up. It either watches your mouth and records your mouth movement, which now I'm using an iPad to push that. But it also can do with the microphone. So it can listen to what your phonemes are coming out of your mouth and then just translate your avatar's mouth to that. It sounds like what you're doing with it. Yeah.
That's roughly what's happening here. But I get the phoneme stream for free from the TTS.
That's really cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And for those who aren't familiar with phonemes, that's the vowels and sounds that are coming out of your mouth and the shape your mouth makes when you make a particular sound.
Yep. If you've ever played with SSML and had to create a phonetic sound of a word, you've played with those before.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. There's also, interestingly, in the SSML definition, there is a mark tag that doesn't get used for anything else in Alexa, but is actually available here. You can just place some text anywhere in the speech as an event. So in the checkers game, I actually have a couple events for facial expressions like happy, sad, angry, and I just stick those in the text along with my TTS, and on the playback side, they appear with the correct timestamp, like do that here, do that here, do that here. So that was also kind of fun.
The stream avatars work the same way. I have a button on my stream deck that I can push to change their facial expression.
Nice. Yeah, live puppeting is so much fun.
Very fun. Gosh, we have so many more good questions in the chat. This has been such a great conversation. Let's go to the questions on YouTube. How can you update a data source file based on user input and APL? Okay, that's APL questions. We have.
Yeah, and actually, our good friends from the developer advocacy group behind the scenes already answered this question for Dremel, which is great.
Wonderful, wonderful, great,
Awesome.
great.
But what he was trying to figure out is, I have an APL document that has something simple like a checkbox. How do I update that checked value every time the user taps on it to make it toggle between checked and unchecked? And then how do I update the value in the data source? So if they chose true this time, let's say it's something like show subtitles, and then the next time they come back to the skill and I load that screen, how do I make sure that that checkbox is checked again? And so the recommendation is to update your data source, right? So as for those of you that haven't played with APL much, each APL document, the UI layer, there's also what we call a data source that sits behind it. And that data source can have all of the values that you might want, images and text and everything else, but it can also have the states of your buttons or your checkboxes or anything like that. And so it's just a matter of updating that data source before you render the APL on the user screen.
Yep. And useful parallels here between the APL and Web API stuff is once you know one, you know the other a little bit. In that, with APL, you send directives down to change the contents of the screen, whether replacing the document or changing some data bindings in the document, executing commands. And then from the document, you can send events back up to your skill. So in this case, I assume that the answer included the idea that you put a command on the checkbox. When it's tapped, you send an event up to your skill so you can update the data source on your skill, store it for that particular customer, and then next time send it back down again. With the web API, it's roughly the same stuff. You have directives for sending information down to the web app, initially to launch a web app, and then afterwards to invoke JavaScript handlers, basically. And you can do the opposite. You can send information from the web app up to the Alexa skill. And we talked earlier about persistence and wanting to have the game resume in the same place. That's roughly the same thing you'd end up having to do there. Whatever it is you're doing in the web app that changes state, whether you're sliding or interacting or talking to it, you would then send events back up to your skill containing that change in state, and you'd save that somewhere. And then next time you launch the game, you would use that saved state to initialize the game.
Got it.
Awesome.
Very good. All right, I actually have a personal question, and this is more a lack of knowledge than anything. So it's been a while since I've built any games or real interactivity in HTML. I spent a lot of time in the C# world, like apps across multiple devices, all sorts of things like that. But there is a comic artist called The Oatmeal. Are you familiar with The Oatmeal?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Most
Matthew Inman.
people, I think, at this point probably are. Well, he and his wife created a game during COVID. That's called it's called A Little Wordy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. The card game.
Super cool game. So I bought it. I have the physical board game version here at home, but I just found out today that he launched 30 days worth of it as a web app.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go to his website. I don't remember what the URL is, but I'm sure if you go to
theoatmeal.com.
and it's an interactive canvas, right? I can click on buttons and I can click on letters to try to spell out the word. If I had built something like that, what would the steps be for me if I wanted to take that specific app, assuming I own it? Don't go take the Oatmeal's work. But if you had that kind of web app and you just wanted to bring it to Alexa, what are the major hurdles, steps that I would have to go through to do something like that, knowing that I did not build it with Alexa in mind?
Yeah, so in that particular case, it's a really cute game. If anyone hasn't tried it, you definitely should try it.
I haven't played this yet. It's very easy to find. It's just that oatmeal.com.
So it's a word search, and there's I think it's 20 letters or something, and you have to find the word. It's 10 letters. You have to find the word that is specified, and initially you have no clues whatsoever, and then there's a set of cards. And each card does something like reveal the first letter, or reveal the third letter, or
tell me how many letters are in the word.
Yeah, and in the physical version, those would be shuffled, and you'd be playing them out. In the web version, there's just an array of them that you can select from. So, if I were to try and port that to Alexa today, the first answer is you can just run it. You can just with maybe 100 lines of code, you can get Alexa to open that game on an Alexa device, and you'd be able to tap and interact with it exactly the same as you do on the web, and it would just work. The next step up from that would be, can you call out the cards by name? Can you answer the word? Can you guess the word by verbally? And in order to do that, we would have to add the Alexa SDK JavaScript file to the web app, which would establish the connection when it's launched on an Alexa device. And then we would listen for the events for intents coming in from Alexa. And we would appropriately handle them in the web app. So instead of on-click for card, we would look at name of card specified by player and flip that one instead and do the same effect for revealing what the hint was. And then on the Alexa skills side, we would start building our language model. I would say like, here's would make a catalog of all of the possible card names as inputs. We would maybe upload all of the possible words if the word list was relatively short, so that we would be able to recognize those. And we do the normal language development stuff in the developer console. There is also the possibility, which is what I'm doing for Anagram Machine, of using events sent up from the web app to prime dynamic entities. So you don't have to know what the words are going to be ahead of time when you're designing your language model. Yes. And that could be really useful for this kind of scenario. So once you've determined what the word is in the web app, you could just send an event up to the Alexa skill and say, update my dynamic entities to include this word. And that way...
I built a very large trivia game a couple of years ago, and that's exactly the solution I came up with, because I have thousands of trivia questions, which means I have thousands of trivia answers. And putting those all in one slot is the same as having a search query slot or anything, because it's just so big and dynamic. And so what I realized is like, well, wait, I know what the question is. I could use dynamic entities and just make my slot one value. And it's just the right answer. And so if you say the right answer, it'll hit it. And if it doesn't, then it won't.
And then you use fallback intent to catch everything else.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the approach that I went with, and it seemed to work really well.
Yep. So that maps really well to this question of the web API stuff. You're still building a skill, and you're doing the language model engineering roughly the same way. You just have the web app running on the device. Cool. Well, that really helped that you and I were both familiar with that game, and we'll get Amanda caught up, because I think it's a really clever. It's just a 2-player game that you can buy the physical version of.
Oh, okay.
But as my wife and I look, and our daughter's in college, my son's halfway through high school, I look around and I go, man, we're gonna need some 2-player games around this house pretty soon. It's just gonna be the two of us. So this seems like one of those fun ones you can just pick up.
Empty nesting.
Yeah.
Well, I like to play games with my family over the internet. Sometimes we get together and play Jackbox. So we need like an Alexa equivalent of that where we can do networking games together.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, though, maybe we should reach out to Matthew Inman and be like, "Hi, would you like to run this in Alexa?"
I mean, yeah, why not, right? We should ask folks.
I am sure Matthew would be open to that idea.
And then we just, we plug the Alexa shopping thing, and we're like, add to cart, add the full game to cart, right?
Yeah, little shopping actions. That'd be great.
It's an awesome idea.
Man, it seems like you got a project.
I know. Well, let's reach out to everybody who has a fun web game, because there's lots of possibilities out there. I think we could really explore. I think we're caught up with chat. Maybe is there anything else we missed on chat?
I don't think so. The only thing was Drumel was talking about that checkbox and how he doesn't want to send an event every time that someone taps on the checkbox. You just want to preserve the state that they leave it in, and you can do that too. What you can do is preserve that thing just to your local code. Save it as a session variable or something like that. And that way, the next time they send a response, that will be persisted in your persistent variables, whether that's database or session variable. And then you can use that the next time the response comes in to say, oh, I need to save this. You would have to do it at least every interaction, I think, just to make sure that you're getting it right. But it wouldn't be very hard to just persist that as a session variable. And then the next time they talk to the skill, or interact with the skill, anytime a new event is sent to your service, you should be able to capture it at that point and use it to update your database or whatever. So you don't have to send an event every time, although I would advise it, because there's a number of times where you could just lose that in the ether. So
Chris, you're working on an Inkle port for
Yes,
Alexa?
I am.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
I just realized that 80 days is Inkle, right?
It is, yeah. And I think it's Heaven's Gate and a couple of other things. They've made some really, really awesome things. 80 Days is fantastic.
Wonderful game. We were playing that on my Switch, actually. We had a friend over, and we were all like taking turns making decisions. I think that was fun. Did
you go north or south?
We did a south and failed, and then did the over the ice cap north as far north as you could possibly go, and won because it's a shorter route. It technically counts.
I really like the story fragments in Siberia. Like on the train in Siberia, there's some cool stuff that happens there.
Oh my gosh, guys! I'm not going to spoiler it for you. If you haven't checked out 80 Days, it's a really interesting game.
It is so good.
You travel around the world in 80 days, but it's different every time you play because there's so many different things that can happen.
Yeah.
I'd love to see experiences like that for voice. It'd be really fun.
Yeah, so they have a demo short story that comes with the engine called The Intercept. Which I've got running on an Alexa device, and it plays surprisingly well, actually, even though it's not designed for voice. And Alexa reading out the TTS for that story actually sounds great as well. So I'll be open sourcing all that stuff to share with the community. And then speaking of those echo buttons from before, I actually did a interactive fiction story for that called The Mystery of Thorium Manor, which is now no longer accessible because we've deprecated the buttons, but I'll be releasing that as a voice-only experience, built in the same engine as an example of how to do narration, integration, and things like that for interactive fiction on Alexa.
That's really cool. I'm excited to see that. One of the things that people were saying, I was talking to people, is like, just to be sure that, how to put this, when you're doing interactive fiction and it's audio only, you have to be sure that the user knows when it's time to interact, right? So that's like the tricky part about that, yeah.
Yeah. In the Intercept story, there are a few moments where if you're not looking at the screen, you wouldn't necessarily know because it just stops and then like prompts you like, what should we do next? It's not a question.
Right.
And it's funny. I initially thought I would go in and maybe do like a revised audio version, like a vocal version of the story, but with a screen, it's actually pretty nice this way. And this is one of those things that I think is going to take a lot of experimentation, and that this is why I'd like us to have a bigger community of folks trying this stuff and trying like A, B, C, D, E, F testing, not just A/B testing design ideas. But it turns out, I think once you're engaged with something like this, some of the thoughts we've had before about voice interactions with individual tasks just don't apply anymore. Like you don't necessarily need a prompt if you're already like 6 questions into a game. Right. Like once you're into the loop, some things you can begin dropping off. You just don't need as much hand-holding anymore. And it is interesting to see how far down you can go. Like how
you get more immersed in it.
You do, yeah. And you build a muscle memory, right? Like I know when it's quiet, it's my turn, and I know to look at the screen to figure out what 3 options I have. And so like you actually don't want a prompt because it starts becoming cumbersome. Right? You don't want to keep saying like, what would you like to do every single time? Right.
You get more involved in the story if you feel like you understand intuitively when it's time to interact with it. Right.
Yeah. And then at some point you go like, well, actually I tested that and these 3 people out of the 10 didn't like it. And so you're like, that's an option. That's something that needs to go in the settings menu. And that becomes like...
Yeah, that's true. You could leave it as accessibility settings. Like, do you want to be prompted or not?
Yeah, so by default in that particular one, I've ended up with read out the story, yes or no, read out the options, yes or no, speeds for both of them, like read out the story normally, but speed through the options. There's just a whole bunch of feedback where people have wanted things.
Oh, question from Milton Hung. If we don't add a prompt, does it get past certification?
It will for these games, for web API games specifically. You can't not prompt on... devices without screens, but when you do have a screen, it is fine for the prompt to be on screen and for the microphone to open.
Nice. All right, I was thinking with our last minute, and this might be tough, but I'll go first to give you guys just a moment. I'd love a rapid fire. I'm going to ask each of you the same question. If there's one game that you know of that you could move to Alexa, what would that game be? And I'll start. I think a cool application of voice on Alexa would be keep talking and no one explodes.
Oh my god, that game is so fun. I love that game so much.
I think that would be super fun. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts on this.
I want to talk to BioWare characters, so that's a lot of what I aim at. Awesome. I want to have I want to have Mass Effect and Dragon Age and all that, and I want to talk to the characters. Yeah.
I just want a little bit of voice. I want a taste of voice control in action games more often. Like when I was watching a streamer play Devil May Cry, which is one of my favorite action games, and you can change your stance by hitting a button, but the character always shouts what stance he's in. What if I could just shout my stance directly at the game
That would
and
be
change
awesome.
stances immediately? Like, oh, I'm in Gunslinger stance. Oh, I'm in Swordmaster stance. Just shout
That'd be
at
kind
the
of
game.
interesting.
Right.
The last Yakuza game was a little bit of a parody of that kind of stuff. So they announced all of their attacks. It would be kind of cool to like just yell the attacks for them.
Announcing your attack. I mean, you wouldn't work in a fighting game because there wouldn't be enough. Like, if it was fast enough to do it, just change stances, it would be really fun.
All right. Well, we have to put a bow on this. I think we could talk to you for another couple of hours, Chris. But
always happy to come
here, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you back again soon. And I also want to thank the audience for being here and the questions and the conversation. It's always fantastic. But with that, we're gonna have to wrap it up today. So for Amanda and Chris, thank you guys all for tuning in, and we will see you guys all very, very soon. We'll be here next week on Tuesday from Project Voice in Chattanooga. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.